Alright, welcome back. I know my last couple of videos I've been clearing my throat a lot. Please forgive me. Yesterday I had a really bad sore throat and a really bad cold. And I'm still trying to clear my system out a little bit. I know one of my bad habits is clearing my throat, but I'm working on that. That's my cross to bear. I have finished epoxying the control horns, not the control horns, the pushrod ends onto the pushrods themselves. Now, what I did at the back, well, we'll get to the back in a minute. Up here, I'd used some medium CA or some thick CA, and I had used a little file to rough up the carbon a little bit, and then I cleaned it off. Then I put the CA on the carbon and stuck it into the rod. Up here, I was not able to break the bond. I used extreme power cyanoacrylate debonder, 1 fluid ounce, and basically I soaked a piece of cloth in the debonder, and then I wrapped it around the joint, and then I soaked it with some more, and then I let it sit there for about 15 minutes or so. It got all the CA off the outside. I was not able to break the bond between the carbon and the pushrod end. I still wasn't ready to trust it though, because DLG launches can be pretty rough. So what I did was, again, I used a little file to rough up the carbon a little bit, and I used a file to rough up the metal a little bit. I mixed up some epoxy, and then I just kind of coated the outside with epoxy. I think it worked out really well. Once it hardens completely, I think that extra epoxy on the outside will give me a good peace of mind bond. Same thing on the elevator. I did the same thing on the elevator. One thing I'm going to do here, I'm using the DS285 servos. And the DS285 servos, all of the arms that come with the DS285 servos have these ginormous holes. And you know, RC is like anything where, you know, a nice tight hole is better. I know that sounds kind of perverted, and it probably is a little bit perverted, but you want a nice tight hole. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a drop of CA on there. Then I'm going to use, I'll use something. I'm kind of going to work the CA down into the hole. Alright, and then I'm going to hit it with a drop of hardener. There you go. Finally got a drop of hardener. I'm going to let that cure for a few minutes, and then I'm going to move the control surfaces. And when I do, because of the way the CA and the hardener interact, it's going to make it very brittle. But what it's going to do is it's going to tighten up the hole a little bit, so that there's no slop up here. Got the battery installed. Got the rudder and the elevator servos installed. I have the little bridges, installed to keep the pushrod from floating around in there. And it looks all nice and neat from the top. I'm about to show you guys a pretty horrible sight. I hit all my wiring underneath. Again, I've got the battery and some hot glue to hold the battery in place. I've got a little GWS speed controller. And the GWS speed controller is being used as the battery eliminator circuit right now. Later on, I will try to get a Castle Creations Beck, but I think for the first few flights, this GWS speed controller should work all right. I've used these speed controllers before, and they seem to work all right. I've got my servos, all the wiring. The wiring is all held in place with hot glue. It's not pretty, but it works. I've got my receiver back here. Moving on back, my receiver antenna exit the pod. There is, if you're using JR, or if you're using Spectrum, there's a lot of carbon reinforcement inside this pod. All right, don't have your antenna inside the airplane. You can come up with some way to get your antenna outside the airplane. This is the 6250 carbon compatible receiver, and it has these long antenna leads that you can drill a hole and stick them out. What I did was I took a piece of string. This is actually some old servo wire, and I drilled the holes, and then I ran the string in through the hole into the bay, and then I put a drop of CA on the end of the string, and I put a drop of hardener on the end of the pushrod, or on the end of the antenna, and then I touched those together and held them for about 3 seconds, which kind of connected the two together. And then I was able to pull the string out, which pulled the antenna out of the pod. So that worked out really well. And then I used a little dab of hot glue and then smoothed over it with my finger to just kind of close up the hole a little bit. I think that worked out really well. Moving back to the top, I have my quick connect for the aileron servos, and this is a polarized connector. It only goes one way. It's a little Dean's Micro. It only goes one way. So once it's wired in, you don't have to worry about which way your aileron servos are moving. Moving on back, the elevator is all epoxied together. I was able to break this free. I put some epoxy down inside of the connector, and then stuck it on there. I did again. I cleared it. I cleaned it with the debonder, the CA debonder, and then I used a file to kind of rough it up a little bit. And then I put epoxy on it, inserted it, and then I roughed up the outside, and then put epoxy on the outside. Make sure that you don't move the control surface while you're waiting for it to dry, because you don't want to epoxy the rod into the push rod cover. Yeah, you don't want to epoxy. Yeah. Moving back to the rudder, same thing. Took it apart, cleaned it, put it back together with some epoxy, then roughed up the outside and put on some more epoxy. Just a little bit of epoxy to kind of bond it together as a single surface. And I think that's good for a couple of reasons. The little blob of epoxy on there, sure, it adds some weight, but at the same time it kind of smooths out the airflow a little bit. Well, like that even matters, but you know, every little bit helps, I guess. And with that, I think that my pod and boom and tail group are completed. I think I can set this aside and press onto the wing. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I hope that this has proved useful for you, and thanks